Right now, there is a good chance you've got it sitting in your kitchen, and you don't think twice about it. But for most of human history, this stuff was worth more than gold. Armies marched for it. Empires taxed it. People got thrown in prison for making it in their own backyard. I'm talking about salt. And the story of how humans found it and fought over it and eventually just started sprinkling it on everything is way weirder than you think. Quick thing before we dive in. If you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe. And if you end up enjoying this one, a quick like actually helps a ton for a channel this new. Okay, let's get into it. So, where did salt actually come from? Well, that depends on what you mean by come from. Because there isn't just one answer here. There are at least 4, and every single one of them changed the world in a completely different way. Let's start with the basics. Salt, real salt, table salt, is sodium chloride. One sodium atom, one chlorine atom, locked together in this neat little cube shape. Zoom into a single grain under a microscope and you'll see tiny, perfect squares over and over. That's not random, that's chemistry. And here's the part that actually matters. Your body cannot make sodium on its own. None of it. Every bit of sodium in you right now came from something you ate or drank. Which means for most of human history, finding salt wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was survival. So why do we crave it so much? Turns out, it's built into you. Sodium is what lets your nerves fire and your muscles move. It's literally how your brain sends signals to the rest of your body. No sodium, no thoughts, no heartbeat. It's one of the 5 basic tastes your tongue is hardwired to detect, right alongside sweet and bitter. That's how deep this goes. And here's the twist. Early humans, especially the ones living inland, away from the ocean, almost never got enough of it. Meat has some. Plants barely have any. So evolution did what it always does. It made salt taste incredible. That craving you get for fries at 11 at night? That's a few million years of survival instinct, still running the show. Answer number 1. Humans learned to dig it straight out of the ground. In a small town in the Austrian Alps called Hallstatt, archaeologists found ancient mining tools deep inside old salt tunnels, wooden picks, leather sacks, even a preserved shoe. Some of that mining goes back thousands of years, all the way to the Stone Age. It got so important that an entire era of European prehistory, the early Iron Age, is literally named after this one salt mining town. Not bad for a seasoning. And it wasn't just Europe. Over in Poland, there's a mine called Wieliczka that's been dug into non-stop since the 13th century. Miners were down there so long, they eventually carved entire chapels straight out of the salt walls. Underground cathedrals made of salt. Meanwhile, ancient communities in China were boiling salty brine down into crystals thousands of years ago too, using shallow pans over open fires. Slow, smoky, and seriously valuable work. Answer number 2. Salt became money. Literally. Across the Sahara, massive camel caravans hauled slabs of rock salt out of desert mines and traded them in cities like Timbuktu. Sometimes, according to old travelers' accounts, for gold of roughly the same weight. In parts of Ethiopia, bars of salt called amole were used as actual currency well into the 20th century. You could buy food with it, pay off debts with it. At some point, salt stopped being just something you ate and started being the economy itself. Answer number 3, and this one's my favorite. Salt didn't just shape economies, it shaped language. Ever heard the word salary? That comes straight from the Latin word for salt, sal. Roman soldiers got a salt allowance built right into their pay. So next time you're complaining about your paycheck, just remember, you're literally being paid in ancient seasoning money. It doesn't stop there either. Salad comes from the same root because Romans used to salt their greens before eating them. Herba salata, salted herb. Even the phrase, worth your salt, comes from this exact era, back when a person's entire pay genuinely depended on it. And once people figured out how valuable salt was, governments could not resist controlling it. In ancient China, around 2,000 years ago, the empire turned salt production into a state monopoly. You couldn't just make your own. Rome built entire roads just to move the stuff. including one literally called the Via Salaria, the Salt Road. Even Venice built its entire early wealth on salt monopolies, controlling supply routes across the Mediterranean centuries before it became famous for glass and gondolas. Over in West Africa, whole kingdoms grew powerful just from controlling the salt and gold trade routes running through the desert. Whoever controlled the salt controlled the money, and whoever controlled the money usually ended up controlling everything else too. By the time we get to France in the 1700s, salt had become one of the most hated taxes in the entire country. It was called the gabelle, a law that forced ordinary families to buy a fixed amount of government salt every year, at a wildly inflated price, whether they needed it or not. People smuggled it, people got arrested over it, and historians still point to that resentment as one of the sparks that helped light the fuse of the French Revolution. But the darkest chapter in the salt story happened in colonial India. Under British rule, salt production became illegal for ordinary Indians. You couldn't collect it from the sea, you couldn't make it in your own home, not even a small amount, just for your own family. Every grain had to come from the British, taxed heavily, even though India's coastline was practically made of the stuff. For millions of poor families, that tax meant real daily hardship over something the ocean handed out for free. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi responded by walking around 240 miles over roughly 3 weeks straight to the coast, where he bent down, picked up a lump of natural salt, and broke the law on purpose, with the entire world watching. It wasn't really a protest about salt. It was about who gets to control what people need just to survive. Fast forward to the 20th century, and salt gets one final glow-up: iodine. Doctors noticed that people living far from the ocean kept developing swollen thyroids, a condition called goiter, because their diets were missing iodine almost completely. So in the 1920s, companies started mixing tiny amounts of iodine straight into table salt. One small tweak to something humans had already been mining, taxing, and fighting over for thousands of years. And it helped wipe out a disease that had quietly affected millions of people. These days, we've circled all the way back to obsessing over it again. Pink Himalayan salt, fancy flaky sea salt, salt literally shipped in from specific mountains for $20 a jar. Same mineral humans have been fighting wars over for thousands of years. We just repackaged it. So, where did salt actually come from? Honestly, there's no single answer. It came from mountains in the Alps, from camel caravans crossing an entire desert, from boiling pans in ancient China, from a hated tax law in France and a walk to the ocean in India. It came from a Bronze Age shoe at the bottom of a mine, and a chapel carved entirely out of rock salt. Here's another way to look at it. Biology found salt first, as something the body simply could not live without. Early humans found it next, as a reason to travel, to trade, to carve entire routes across empty desert. Empires found it after that, as something to tax, to control, to fight wars over. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, ordinary people just kept finding it the one way that actually mattered, as something to put on dinner. One more way to think about it. If salt is just a mineral, then this is a story about chemistry. But if salt is something every human body has needed since the very beginning, then this was never really a story about a mineral at all. It's a story about us, about how far people will go and what they'll build and who they'll tax over something small enough to hold in one hand and easy enough to forget about completely. So next time you reach for the salt shaker without even thinking about it, remember, you're not just seasoning your food. You're holding a piece of the oldest trade route on Earth.